She thought she had him all figured out. Another black man with too many problems. Another single father who had probably made too many mistakes. Another case she'd have to handle with forced politeness, knowing deep down it would lead nowhere. But she was wrong. Because the man standing in front of her wasn't what she expected. He wasn't desperate. He wasn't struggling. And he wasn't looking for her pity. He was looking for something she never imagined. And by the time she realized it, by the time she saw the truth, Amanda Reynolds would never be the same again. Amanda had spent her whole life in a world that made sense to her. A world of order, routine, and quiet, unspoken rules. She grew up in a place where things were predictable, where success had a certain look and failure had a face she had been taught to recognize without question. Her career as a real estate agent had only reinforced those beliefs. She sold homes to the kind of people she had always known, people like her, families with smiling children, polished careers, and picture-perfect lives. They were the right kind of buyers, the right kind of homeowners. And then, one day, Marcus Bennett walked into her office. Amanda barely looked up from her desk at first. It was automatic, the way she judged him, the way her mind filled in the blanks before he even had a chance to speak. He was here for a rental, she assumed. Probably something low income. Or maybe he was in some custody battle, scrambling to prove himself to the courts. She had seen it before. Men who showed up last minute, trying to clean up a mess they had made. She didn't notice the quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. She didn't notice the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that only comes from working 2 jobs and still showing up to parent with everything you have. She didn't even really hear his voice when he spoke, calm, direct, unwavering, but she did see the little girl beside him. She was small, no older than 7, her big brown eyes filled with something Amanda didn't expect, hope. She clutched Marcus's hand tightly, looking up at Amanda as if she were someone important, someone who held the key to their future. Amanda should have smiled at her. She should have greeted her the way she greeted every other client's child, with warmth and easy charm. But instead, she felt a strange discomfort settle in her chest. Because for the first time, something about this didn't fit. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Marcus wasn't supposed to stand there with quiet certainty. He wasn't supposed to dress neatly, speak politely, or look at her like he had every right to be there. And his daughter wasn't supposed to look at him the way other little girls looked at their fathers, with complete trust, with the certainty that he would always be there. Something was off, and Amanda didn't like it. She cleared her throat, straightened the stack of brochures on her desk, and forced a professional smile. "How can I help you?" Marcus met her gaze, unreadable but polite. "I'm looking to buy a home." Amanda felt the breath hitch in her throat. "Buy?" She hesitated for half a second, long enough for doubt to creep in, long enough for the assumptions to whisper in her mind. He can't afford it. He must be joking. But Marcus wasn't joking. He was serious. And Amanda was about to learn just how wrong she had been. May we always have open hearts, open minds, and the strength to challenge our own biases. May love and justice always guide us, and may we stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Have you ever misjudged someone based on what you were taught? Let's explore how Amanda's world was turned upside down. Amanda Reynolds had never thought of herself as racist. She didn't use slurs, didn't clutch her purse when passing. A black man on the street didn't rant about crime statistics at dinner parties. She simply believed in facts, in numbers, in what she had seen with her own eyes, and what she had seen, what she had been taught, was that some people just weren't made for success. She didn't say it out loud, of course. She wasn't ignorant. But she had grown up hearing about the statistics, the crime rates, the broken homes. She knew how the world worked. She knew that most single black fathers were either absent or barely hanging on. And if they weren't, well, they were probably the exception. Her job as a real estate agent had only reinforced those beliefs. She had spent years selling homes in the kind of neighborhoods where nothing ever changed. The people who bought from her were like her, successful, polished, predictable. Her office was sleek, all glass and marble, nestled in an affluent suburb where the biggest complaint was whose lawn looked better. The world Amanda lived in was one of quiet rules, unspoken but understood. She never had to think twice about who belonged in these homes and who didn't. So when Marcus Bennett walked through the glass doors of her office that morning, she didn't even look up right away. She barely registered his presence, already making assumptions before she had even seen his face. Another case that wouldn't go anywhere. Probably looking for a rental, something low budget, maybe a Section 8 voucher. But then he stepped forward, and she finally looked up. He was tall, well-dressed, his posture straight and composed. There was no hesitation in his steps, no uncertainty in his expression. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and direct. "I'm looking to buy a home." Amanda blinked, forcing a neutral smile. Something about him unsettled her, though she couldn't say why. She should have just taken his request like any other client. But instead, a thought crept into her mind. Uninvited. Men like him don't usually buy houses here. And for the first time in a long time, Amanda felt something she wasn't used to feeling. Doubt. Have you ever been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth? What did you do? Amanda didn't want to be assigned to Marcus. It wasn't personal, she told herself. It was just business. She had a certain clientele she was used to working with. Families who fit the mold. Buyers who didn't need explanations or second looks. People who, from the first handshake, felt like a done deal. Marcus Bennett did not feel like a done deal, but her boss had made it clear. She was the only agent available, and Marcus was serious about buying. So here she was, standing across from him in the office's sleek, glass-walled meeting room, feeling an irritation she couldn't quite place. She folded her hands on the table, tilting her head in the way she always did when dealing with difficult clients. "So, are you looking to rent or buying?" The word was spoken so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it took Amanda a second to register it. She blinked. "Buying?" Marcus nodded. She let out a small, polite laugh. "Oh, right. Well," she hesitated, trying to recover. "What's your price?" "Range? Up to $650," he said smoothly. Amanda felt her stomach tighten. $650,000? That wasn't just a small starter home. That was a competitive market. That was families with generational wealth. That was the kind of money that didn't come from scraping by. She hesitated just a little too long. "That should give us some options," she finally said, skimming through her mental list of available properties. She stole a glance at him, trying to figure it out. There had to be an explanation. Former athlete? Maybe. He was tall, broad-shouldered. Basketball? Football? Or music? Maybe he had a record deal. Some kind of money that came fast but wouldn't last. Marcus sat back in his chair watching her. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Something she couldn't quite place. She cleared her throat. This neighborhood isn't usually affordable for everyone. The words had barely left her mouth before she realized how they sounded. Marcus didn't flinch. His expression didn't change. He simply nodded once and said, "I work 2 jobs. I save. That's how I make it work." Amanda forced a tight smile, suddenly wishing this meeting would end. Because for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was the one in control of it. Amanda sat at her desk, tapping her pen against the polished surface, trying to shake the unease that had settled in her chest. She had spent the last hour combing through listings, and no matter how she framed it, something about Marcus Bennett didn't make sense. $650. That was his budget. That was real money, serious buyer money. And yet every part of her resisted the idea that a single black father, someone who, by all statistics, should have been struggling, was looking in a neighborhood where even her wealthiest clients had to compete. She sighed and swiveled her chair toward Olivia, her closest friend in the office. Olivia had been in real estate longer than Amanda, and they often shared the same unspoken understanding about the clients they worked with. Amanda leaned in, lowering her voice. "I don't get why he's looking here," Olivia smirked knowingly. "You know how it is. They always want what they can't have." Amanda let out a small, breathy laugh. It wasn't cruel, just factual. That was the reality, wasn't it? People reached beyond their means all the time. She had seen it before. Buyers who wanted the luxury neighborhoods, the perfect schools, the prestige of a zip code they couldn't afford. Maybe Marcus was no different. And yet, as she flipped through the listings on her screen, something didn't sit right. That evening, she had dinner with her parents at their usual spot, an upscale steakhouse with dim lighting and the kind of clientele that made her feel like she had done everything right in life. Her father carved into his steak, barely looking up when Amanda mentioned the client she had been assigned. A black, single dad looking in Fairfield? He scoffed, shaking his head. That's ambitious. Her mother pursed her lips, sipping her wine. You know how they are, honey. They always want to push boundaries, never satisfied with what's reasonable. Amanda nodded absently, picking at her salad. She wasn't sure why she had even brought it up. Maybe she had expected some validation, some reinforcement of what she already knew to be true. Instead, their words left a strange taste in her mouth. She should have agreed, should have laughed it off the way she always did, but something about it felt off. Later that night, she stopped by a small diner on her way home. She wasn't hungry, but the silence of her apartment felt suffocating, and she needed a distraction. She slid into a booth near the window, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone when a familiar voice caught her attention. At a table in the corner, Marcus sat across from his daughter, a children's workbook open between them. She was frowning, chewing on the end of her pencil while he pointed at the page, patiently explaining something she didn't quite understand. His suit jacket was draped over the back of his chair, his sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, but not impatient, not rushed. He had the kind of exhaustion that came from working hard, but never at the expense of what mattered most. Amanda watched, unable to look away. This wasn't the picture she had expected. Where was the struggle? The irresponsibility? The absent. Father, she had always believed, was the rule, not the exception. Marcus wasn't staring at his phone, wasn't distracted, wasn't dismissing his daughter's frustration. He was present. He was teaching her. He was showing up, and for the first time, Amanda felt something she didn't recognize. Doubt. Not about Marcus, about herself, about everything she had been so sure of. She swallowed hard and looked down at her untouched plate, because no matter how much she wanted to believe she was right, the truth was starting to look a lot different than she had ever imagined. Amanda had always prided herself on being logical, on seeing the world for what it was. But lately, the way she saw things had started to shift, and she didn't know how to make sense of it. She told herself it was just curiosity, that Marcus Bennett was simply an anomaly, an outlier in a system she had always believed to be predictable. But deep down, something was shifting. She saw it in the way he carried himself, in the way he interacted with his daughter. She saw it in the patience he had, in the way he navigated a world that seemed to expect so little from him. One afternoon, she stepped outside the office for coffee, only to spot Marcus across the street. He was leaning against his car, phone pressed to his ear, rubbing the back of his neck. Even from a distance, she could see the exhaustion in his posture, the weight he carried. A moment later, the passenger door opened, and his daughter peeked out, clutching a stuffed animal. Marcus immediately ended the call, slipping his phone into his pocket as he crouched beside her. Amanda couldn't hear their conversation, but she could see his expression soften, his hand resting gently on her back. He smoothed her curls as she leaned against him, tired but trusting, and that was when she realized he was balancing everything. 2 jobs, raising a daughter, dealing with the constant, invisible expectations that came with being a black man in spaces that weren't built for him. And yet, he never let it show. He never let his exhaustion become his daughter's burden. She had sold homes to dozens of families. She had seen fathers who barely glanced at their kids, men who sent their nannies to house tours, men who had every privilege in the world and still made excuses for their absence. But here was Marcus, working twice as hard, giving twice as much, and still being doubted. She didn't know what to do with that realization. Then came the moment she couldn't ignore. It was late in the evening when she stepped out of the office, locking up for the night, when she saw Marcus again. Only this time, something was wrong. He was running, actually running, across the parking lot, his daughter cradled in his arms. Her small body was curled against his chest, her face pressed into his shoulder. Even from a distance, Amanda could see the fear in his eyes. She had never seen him like that before. Without thinking, she followed, her heels clicking against the pavement as she caught up. "Marcus!" He barely glanced at her. "She's burning up," he said, his voice tight. "I need to get her to the ER." Amanda stepped back, feeling a strange lump in her throat as she watched him gently adjust his daughter in his arms before hurrying to his car. She stood there long after he had driven off, feeling something she couldn't explain. Would any of her clients do that? Would her father have done that? She already knew the answer. The next morning, when she walked into the office, Olivia was leaning against Amanda's desk, sipping her coffee. "Guess who backed out of the Maplewood listing?" Olivia smirked. "Marcus Bennett." Apparently, he realized. It wasn't realistic after all. Amanda frowned. "What do you mean?" Olivia shrugged. "Come on, he was never going to buy here. Guys like him want to prove a point, but when it comes down to it, they know their place." Amanda felt a rush of something she wasn't used to. Something sharp, something defensive. "He can afford it," she said before she even realized she had spoken. Olivia laughed. "Yeah, for now, but we both know how this goes." Amanda stared at her, something shifting deep in her chest. For the first time, she didn't laugh along. She didn't nod, because for the first time, she wasn't sure she liked the person she had been before. Have you ever seen something so clearly that you couldn't ignore it anymore? Amanda had spent years watching deals fall through, clients walking away at the last moment, sellers hesitating over minor details, buyers losing interest when the timing wasn't right. It was all part of the job, but this was different. She sat at her desk, staring at the email in front of her, the words burning into her mind as if they were written in fire. "After careful consideration, we have decided to go in a different direction with our home sale. We appreciate the interest but feel that the buyer may not be the best fit for our neighborhood." She read it again and again, her hands curled into fists. Marcus had done everything right. He had the finances, the credit, the stability. He had worked harder than half the clients she had ever sold to. There was no logical reason, none, that this deal shouldn't have gone through, except there was, and it was the reason she had spent years pretending didn't exist. Amanda stood abruptly, shoving her chair back as she marched down the hallway to her boss's office. "They rejected him," she said, slapping the printed email onto his desk. Her boss, a man who had been in the industry long enough to stop being surprised by anything, simply raised an eyebrow. "I figured they would." Her stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Amanda, you know how this works. It's not about the money. It's about the fit. People want neighbors they're comfortable with. Buyers like Marcus." He exhaled slowly. "They make people uncomfortable." Amanda's jaw clenched. "That's discrimination." Her boss shrugged. "It's not against the law to reject an offer. They don't have to say why." She wanted to scream, to argue, to make him see how wrong this was. But then she remembered who she was talking to. For years, she had been a part of this system. She had smiled and nodded when clients had whispered, "We just don't want the neighborhood to change too much." She had accepted it as just another unspoken rule. Now, standing here, she felt sick. She grabbed her coat and stormed out of the office, barely registering the sound of her heels clicking against the pavement as she drove to Marcus's apartment. When he opened the door, his expression didn't change. He already knew. "They rejected your offer," she said, breathless, "because of who you are." Marcus sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Yeah," he said simply. "Figured they would." Amanda gaped at him. "That's it? You're just accepting this?" Marcus gave a small, weary smile. "Amanda, I've been black my whole life. You think this is the first time someone's told me I don't belong?" Her chest tightened. She had spent her entire career believing in fairness, that if people worked hard enough, followed the rules, they would succeed. That race wasn't a barrier, just an excuse people used when they couldn't compete. Now, she was staring at a man who had worked twice as hard, played by every rule, and was still being told he wasn't good enough. She felt shame rise in her throat, not just for what had happened, For every time she had nodded along, laughed at the jokes, dismissed the complaints. For every time she had been blind because it was easier than seeing the truth. "This is disgusting," she muttered. "This isn't fair." Marcus nodded. "It's nothing new." Amanda swallowed hard, looking away. She had never felt small in her own world before. Never felt like she was standing on the wrong side of something too big to fix. But standing here in Marcus's doorway, she realized this wasn't about fixing one thing. It was about undoing everything she had ever believed. Amanda had never fought for a client before. Not like this. Sure, she had negotiated for better deals, argued over closing costs, smoothed over last-minute hurdles. But those were just business transactions, part of the job. This was different. She spent the next 2 days combing through listings, making calls, pulling every favor she could. She knew what she was looking for. Not just a house, but a home. A place where Marcus and his daughter would be safe, where they wouldn't have to fight for their right to belong. She found it on the outskirts of town. A quiet street, a spacious yard, a home even better than the one he had lost. And this time, she wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. She made sure the sellers never saw him, handled every detail herself, used the same network that had shut him out to push the deal through before anyone could object. By the time her boss found out, the papers had already been signed. "You went behind my back," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "I did what was right," she shot back. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You know you just lost your commission, right?" She exhaled slowly. "Then I guess I'll have to live with that." And for the first time in her career, she didn't care. Marcus stood in the doorway of his new home, his daughter already running through the empty rooms, her laughter echoing off the walls. He turned to Amanda, something unreadable in his expression. "I don't know how to thank you for this." "You don't have to," she said softly. He studied her for a long moment. "This isn't just about the house, is it?" Amanda opened her mouth, then hesitated, because suddenly, it wasn't just about the house. It wasn't just about justice. She had spent weeks trying to understand Marcus, trying to fit him into a category that made sense to her. And in the process, she had been the one who changed. "I don't just respect you," she said finally, her voice quiet. "I love you." Marcus didn't speak at first. Then he smiled, slow and knowing. "I was wondering when you'd figure that out." Amanda let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Amanda had spent her whole life believing she understood the world, that she knew who worked hard, who deserved what and how success was earned. But after everything that had happened, after Marcus, she realized she had been blind. She wasn't the same woman who had doubted him that first day in her office. She wasn't the same person who had let herself believe the rules were fair, that the system worked for everyone. She had seen the truth now, and she couldn't unsee it. She quit her job the following week. There was no dramatic speech, no fight, just a quiet decision to walk away from a system that had upheld everything she had once believed in. Instead, she started her own firm, one dedicated to helping minority homebuyers navigate a world that had never been built for them. Marcus was the first person she told. He was standing on the porch of his new home, watching his daughter race through the yard, her laughter ringing through the air. Amanda had never seen her so happy. "You didn't have to do this," Marcus said, turning to her. She met his gaze, her voice steady. "Yes, I did." There was a long pause, a quiet understanding passing between them. Marcus smiled. "So, now what?" Amanda tilted her head, a small smirk playing at her lips. "Dinner," he chuckled. "You're finally asking me out?" She shrugged. "I figure I've already changed everything else about my life. Might as well keep going." The sun dipped lower in the sky, bathing them in a golden glow. And for the first time in a long time, Amanda wasn't looking back. Have you ever had to challenge everything you believed? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, let us know what you want to see next. What kind of stories move you? What would you like us to improve? Your feedback shapes what we create next. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.